Good evening. My name is James. I'm one of the pastors here at Emmanuel, and we are thrilled to have you out here this evening with us. It is going to be an exciting night, to say the least. I have been sitting with these men, deeply encouraged in my own faith and encouraged in the calling of pastoral ministry to continue the race well. And regardless of if you're a pastor or not, my hope is that you will walk away from this evening encouraged in the faith, encouraged to finish the race well. So thanks for coming out. Thanks for setting time aside in your schedules on a Friday evening to come and hear about this conversation. That is our theology forum on eschatology, the doctrine of last things. There's a couple reasons why we are having this conversation tonight. Our attention is on one of the most formative yet frequently debated fields within Christian theology. Oftentimes, unfortunately, eschatology is viewed as if it were not as important as other theological studies, or as if it were merely speculation about the future. But the reality is, and the reason that we're having this forum, is that our eschatology, our understanding of how things end, also impacts our understanding of how eternity begins. And so we want to have this conversation because we want to fix our eyes on the glory of Christ, and we want to look forward to that day where eternity with Christ begins. And that's why we're having the conversation. The study of eschatology echoes what dear Samwise Gamgee asked Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. Is everything sad going to come untrue? By which, of course, the scriptures give us a resounding yes. Yes, all sad things will come untrue. The study of eschatology asks the questions of how will that, the end of all sad things, come untrue? That's what eschatology asks. So why is it essential that we're here and now? Because eschatology grounds Christian hope. It grounds Christian hope. It grounds our hope in God's sovereign consummation of redemption. Why are we here and now studying eschatology and having this conversation? Because it anchors our ethics. The way that we live today is inseparable from what we believe about what will happen tomorrow. Also because it energizes us for mission, reminding the church that the gospel must be proclaimed until Christ returns. And then lastly, because it informs our suffering. It assures us that all things will be made new. And Sam's question, will all sad things come untrue, are resoundingly yes. And so that's why we are having this conversation. Karl Barth once said, the Christian life is lived between the resurrection and the return. Or another way to say it would be, the Christian life is lived between two advents. The first advent, the incarnation of Jesus, and the second advent, the return of Christ, the King. And so to study eschatology is to live faithfully within that tension. So we are honored to have our guest here today. We have Dr. Keith Foskey. He's known for his show of Conversations with a Calvinist. Dr. Foskey is a pastor of Sovereign Grace Family Church. Did I get that right? Boom, nailed it. He's known as the king of the amillennials. He was recently voted, I don't know if you know this or not, but he was recently voted favorite church father. So welcome, Church Father Foskey. Thanks for joining us. He's a theologian. He's known for his robust Reformed engagement and engaging with even our culture today. He's a husband to Jennifer, and he's a father of 6 children. We also have Dr. Sung Wook Chung. Did I say it correct? Okay. He's a professor of Christian theology at Denver Seminary. I actually learned last night after talking with him, and we got to nerd out a little bit. He's a scholar of C.S. Lewis. He's also a Jonathan Edwards scholar. Pastor Chung pastors an independent Korean congregation in Denver. He's the father of 2 children, and he represents our historic premillennial position tonight. And then lastly, we have a resident theologian, Mr. Josiah Batten. He's a pastor along with me at Emmanuel Church. He served as Emmanuel Christian School's headmaster for 4 years. He pioneered our endeavors into the classical Christian school that we are today. Josiah is known for his Christian ethics. He writes and engages on the topics of our time on social media often. He is also an author, and so if you're interested in picking up one of his books, he has them out front for you. He's a husband to Jessica Batten. He has 2 daughters, and he is representing our post-millennial position tonight. So I'll invite my guests to come on up. Here is how tonight is going to work. Each participant is going to present a biblical case for their position. And so each will have 15 minutes to give a 30,000-foot view of their position. Keith, I will get a buzzer if you go longer than 15 minutes. All right. So 30,000-foot view of their position. After each has had the opportunity to present their position, we'll do a brief 5-minute break. You guys can head to the bathrooms, which I should mention that if this is your first time here, bathrooms are behind me, both doors here, women's bathroom on this side, men's bathroom on that side. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then after a 5-minute break, our participants will have 10 minutes each to ask their other participants questions about their view. And then lastly, we'll spend the last portion of our time together answering your questions. And so you can text into this number here, 304-460-8563. You can text in questions that you might have for our contestants. If it's a specific question for one of them, go ahead and put their name on there so we know who you're asking. But we'll spend the last remainder of our time together with our participants answering some of your guys' questions. So that's where we're going to be tonight. First up, Dr. Chung with the historic premillennial view. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Just making sure.
Hey, everybody. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah. It is a great privilege and an honor to be here with you. And I'm going to represent historic premillennialism. And, first of all, I want to distinguish historic premillennialism from dispensational premillennialism. So anybody who supports dispensationalism, raise your hand. Anybody here? Sort of, okay. Yeah, dispensational premillennialism has definitely overlapped with historic premillennialism, but just maybe one overlap, probably. Only dispensationalism is also a premill position, which means what? Jesus Christ returns before the millennial kingdom. So dispensational and historic premillennialism have something in common in terms of premillennial return of our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay? But except that, there are many controversies and many disputes and many differences between dispensational and historic premillennialism. So I want you to distinguish properly historic premill from dispensational premill. Then what are major differences between dispensational and historic? Primarily, dispensationalism gives a lot of privileges to the Jews, okay? So the primary people of God for dispensationalism is the Jews. The Gentiles are just what? Just like an appendix, okay? So the Jews are the primary people of God. So God's dealings with the Jews should be sharply distinguished from God's dealings with Gentiles or the church. So for dispensationalists, God's heart is not on the church, but the Jewish people. Yeah, this may be a little bit of oversimplification, but still I think that's true of many dispensationalists, okay? So that's the major difference. And then historic premillennialism adopts covenantal hermeneutics, okay? Which means actually we see the unity between the Old Testament and the New Testament and God's covenant providence, covenantal providence from the covenant of grace, actually after the fall, Genesis 3:15, right? And then the covenant of Abraham and the covenant with Moses, actually that's more the covenant of works, but still the covenant of works, and both actually covenant of grace, even the Mosaic covenant, and then the Davidic covenant and the new covenant.
Did you know some drivers have saved up to $700 a year simply by switching their auto insurance? Most people just keep renewing their policy without ever checking.
The prophecy and promise about the new covenant and then the fulfillment of the new covenant through Jesus Christ, right? So we have continuity and consistency of God's dealings with God's people. So historic premill position is more covenantal in terms of its hermeneutics. Okay, that's very important. So you need to be able to distinguish dispensational from historic premillennialism. And then the third one is actually what? According to historic premillennialism, God's heart is on the church from eternity to eternity. Okay? Which means even in the Old Testament, we can find the church, which is a combination of the Jews and the Gentiles. Abraham, according to Romans 3 and 4, according to the Apostle Paul's argumentation, Abraham was not a Jew before his circumcision. He was a Gentile, before his circumcision. And then he became a Jew, after God's establishment of the covenant of circumcision. And then actually even before Abraham became a Jew, God had been dealing with the church, which is a combination of the Jews and the Gentiles. And actually, God promised Abraham to be the channel of blessing of the kingdom. In him and through him, all the families, which means all ethnic groups, right? All the nations, all the languages, and all the different racial people, all people will be blessed in and through Abraham, which means even in the Old Testament, the church is the center of God's dealings and God's providence. So, historic premillennialism is totally different from dispensational premillennialism in terms of hermeneutics, in terms of understanding of the church, and also in terms of understanding of God's providential dealings with humanity. Okay? That's very important. And then secondly, why do we use the language historic? So here, historic means actually the premillennialism supported by people throughout the church, throughout the history of the church, from the 1st century to the 21st century. So historic, historic premillennialism, which means a premillennialism that has been historically supported and advocated and propounded by so many faithful believers in the church. And also actually, what is the church fathers' position in terms of eschatology? The church fathers' position, right after the death of John the Apostle, we had his disciples, Papias, Polycarp, and Irenaeus. So Papias, and Polycarp, they met the Apostle John. They learned from him. So Papias and Polycarp, they were advocates of historic premill position. And Irenaeus, who was the apostle, the disciple of Polycarp, he was the first church father who advocated historic premillennialism. And after him, we had a lot of church fathers, especially in the patristic period, including Justin Martyr and then Tertullian, and Lactantius, and many other, churchy fathers. Actually, if we number churchy fathers, actually I think about 90% of the churchy fathers we know were the advocates and proponents of historic premillennialism. So only several exceptions we have. Origen of Alexandria, he should be, but he should be suspected. We are suspicious of his heresy, actually. But anyhow, Origen of Alexandria, he was kind of first person who advocated amillennialism, and then Augustine, right? Augustine of Hippo, he was a historic premillennialist in his earlier period, but later he changed his position into amillennial eschatology. So, Origen of Alexandria and also Augustine of Hippo, they are two major proponents of amillennialism, but most of churchy fathers, actually, they supported historic premillennialism. And during the medieval age, actually, Roman Catholicism adopted a millennial position, okay? And then, so historic premillennialism was systematically suppressed. And then after the Reformation, unfortunately, Martin Luther and John Calvin, I really adore them. I really admire them. Luther and Calvin, my theological fathers. And Luther and Calvin, actually, they accepted Augustinian soteriology, right? And then also they accepted Augustinian eschatology. So Luther and Calvin advocated a millennial position, but Calvin's position was a little bit more, a little bit different from contemporary amillennialism, because Calvin's amillennialism was a little bit more pessimistic about history, about human history, about the progress of human history. Calvin was more realistic or pessimistic. Anyhow, after that, in the 17th century, we begin to have new advocates of historic premillennialism, especially among Puritans, especially among Baptist forefathers. I think John Bunyan. Anybody knows John Bunyan? Yeah, John Bunyan was a historic premillennialist. He wrote The Pilgrim's Progress, right? The classic book. Anybody has read Pilgrim's Progress? Raise your hand. Beautiful. Yeah, you guys are real Baptists here. So John Bunyan, I love him, even though I'm not a Baptist, I am in between Presbyterian and Baptist position. But anyhow, thank you. So John Bunyan was a historic premill. And then anybody knows Benjamin Keach? Anybody knows? Raise your hand. Yeah, Benjamin Keach, he is famous for typological hermeneutics, right? Benjamin Keach was a historic premill. After that, and in the 19th century, the prince of preachers, who is Charles Haddon Spurgeon, he was a historic premillennialist. I love him very much. And then in the 20th century, another prominent Baptist theologian, John Piper. Okay? Anybody knows John Piper? Yeah, his eschatological position is a historic premillennialism. Wow. What a Baptist strong support, right? I do not want to persuade you to accept the historic premillennialism, but just I want to give you an opportunity to think about, historic premillennialism as a serious alternative to dispensationalism and amillennialism and post-millennialism. Okay, I cannot persuade you guys now today, only 4-15 minutes. Okay, but I want to give you an opportunity. I really want to encourage you to think about historic premillennialism as a serious option, as a serious alternative to dispensationalism and amillennialism and postmillennialism. Okay? And Genesis 1:28. Anybody memorizes Genesis 1:28? Genesis 1:28, God commissioned or God blessed Adam and Eve. Hey guys, be fruitful and multiplied, subdue the earth and rule over every living thing on the earth. That's Edenic covenant of kingdom. That's the Edenic covenant of kingdom or Edenic covenant of blessing, or I actually want to interpret Genesis 1:28 as God's first covenantal or promissory commission. So God commissioned or commanded Adam and Eve to rule over every living thing on the earth, but they failed because of the fall, right? And right after that, Genesis 3:15, proto-evangelium. The seed of the woman will come, and the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. God's promise of what? Ultimate victory of God or of Christ over the power of Satan, right? So actually, I want to emphasize God's commission given to Adam in Genesis 1:28 was given in the spatio-temporal context, not in eternal context. Okay? So God's commission given to Adam and Eve was given in the spatial and temporal context, and that commission, that blessing has never been fulfilled properly. So the Lord Jesus Christ, the last Adam and the second Adam, through him, God's first commission, which was given in the spatial temporal context, must be fulfilled, okay, through the restoration of this earth, the current spatial temporal world before entering into the eternal and glorified state. Okay? So the Lord Jesus' second coming is about fulfillment of Adamic commission and Adamic covenant, which was given in the book of Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, in the spatial temporal world. Okay? So that is the penultimate state before entering into the eternalized and glorified state of the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, so the millennial kingdom is the restoration of the lost Eden. And the Garden of Eden was created, to be expanded into the whole globe. Okay, we have a lot of controversies about the location of the Garden of Eden. But as we know, the Garden of Eden, if we want to physically pinpoint, probably the Garden of Eden was located, near Turkish area, or, something like that. So anyhow, the Garden of Eden was meant to be expanded into the whole globe. So the whole globe should be the Garden of Eden, or should be, like the Garden of Eden. So actually the Lord's second coming is the restoration of this earth in the spatial temporal context in order to fulfill God's will, God's original will and commission given to Adam and Eve. So the millennial kingdom must be there to demonstrate God's fidelity to his commission and to his original will, okay, revealed to Adam and Eve. So the millennial kingdom is the fulfillment of God's promise, God's covenantal promissory commission of Genesis 1:28. I think that's really important. And then, according to let me get to Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19 here, verse 20. After the Lord's second coming, actually here, according to chapter 19, verse 20, the beast, the two of them, the beast and the false prophet, were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Okay, so this is done deal. The Antichrist, the beast, and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire. And then if we go to chapter 20, verse 10, Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire. And very interesting comment here. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire, burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. What does it mean? Throwing of the beast and the false prophet happened before the devils being thrown into the lake of fire. What does it mean? So here we have the God, the Lord's second coming, and then the beast and the false prophet were thrown into the lake of fire. This is a different, we have an order, okay? And then we have, in between, we have the millennial kingdom. And then after the millennial kingdom, actually, we have Satan's being thrown into the lake of fire. And according to chapter 20, verse 10, they had been thrown into the lake of fire. So, as we have order of salvation, ordo salutis. Anybody knows about ordo salutis? Yeah, order of salvation. We have an order of judgment. Okay, God's judgment, Jesus' judgment upon the Antichrist and the false prophet when he comes again. And then after 1,000, maybe not literal 1,000, but anyhow, some kind of millennial kingdom on earth. And then after Satan was released, and then he will be finally, eventually thrown into the lake fire. And actually that God's judgment upon Satan, okay, will happen after Jesus Christ's judgment upon the Antichrist and the false prophet. So we have a proper order of judgment. Okay, I think this is very important. And then, how many minutes do I have? Over 15? Oh, okay.
It's okay. Right?
Yeah, then I think I want to respect, okay, your time. And yeah, I think this is actually the gist of my argument, okay, for historic premillennialism. And then actually we have some panelists who will raise questions, and then maybe you may have some questions, okay? So I want to finish right here. Thank you so much.